And it was shortly thereafter that some people visited me in my office, and after several meetings, asked me to be part of their organization. Now, what that organization was at the time, I had no idea. But they were cleared. They had the blue IC badge like I had, and they had all the clearances. And finally, one day I met their boss, and that's when I learned about the U.S. government's UFO investigation. And by the way, we weren't the only show in town. There was a long history of the U.S. government being involved in investigating. We call them now UAP, but in the vernacular, it's UFOs.
Now, at the time, is that a publicly known organization, or it's underground that no one knows about?
It was not publicly known at all.
So no. You're talking about the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program? Is that the one?
Correct, ATIP. And in fact, there was a larger umbrella called OSAP, and then there was some evolution over time where the focus went from OSAP to really kind of more pinpoint focused, which was ATIP. So ATIP was looking pretty much at the nuts and bolts of UAP interactions with U.S. government assets. So think of military aircraft, military installations, other type of research centers that belong to the U.S. government, and how UAP were interacting in and around those areas.
Okay, so is this the one that Harry Reid raised $22 million to start? This is the one?
That's correct. That's correct.
So what prompted him to want to do this? Like, normally somebody doesn't just wake up and say, guys, we have to start this thing, and I want to start recruiting certain people. Let's go raise $22 million to investigate what? What prompted his motive?
Right. So it wasn't just Harry Reid. A lot of people think this was some sort of wild goose chase by Senator Harry Reid. Mm-hmm. It wasn't. This was a bipartisan effort. It was also Senator Ted Stevens and from Alaska, who was a Republican, and Senator Inouye from Hawaii. And on top of that, you had also John Glenn as well, former astronaut John Glenn. And they had their own experiences with UAP. So, for example, Stevens actually during war had seen a UAP, and also Harry Reid had indicated that he had several, if you will, run-ins with UAP himself when he was younger. And so,
when he got younger.
When he was younger.
You're not talking about the time he got a black eye. That wasn't a UAP. That's a different story.
Probably felt like a UAP crashing into him.
I'm just trying to make sure we don't want stories to be. Yeah. But go ahead. When he was younger.
Yeah. And so there's always been an interest by these individuals in Congress to get to the bottom of this. There was also a report, which I heard directly from the former senator, where he was accidentally read onto the program at one point, to the ongoing government's UFO program. And he was so incensed that when they tried to read him off and say, oh, there was a mistake, we shouldn't have told you about this, he got very mad. And this was one of the many reasons why he got involved. There was also several individuals in the Pentagon at the time who were also very concerned about UAP. One of them was actually the original director for OSAP, Dr. James Lukatsky. James Lukatsky was probably, in my opinion anyways, the world's premier rocket scientist. This is an individual who epitomizes what it means to be a rocket scientist for the U.S. government. He could tell you the burn rate of a first-stage solid rocket booster motor. He could tell you the trajectory and reentry velocity of, let's say, a MIRV, multiple reentry vehicle coming in from low Earth orbit. The guy was just a wealth of information.
Skinwalkers at the Pentagon? That's who you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's James Lukatsky, and there were several others that were part of this effort. And I can happy to talk to you about them. But
what was Harry Reid's interaction when he was a kid?
I don't know. He never shared that with me.
But he did say that he did have something.
He shared that with me and a couple others. Yeah,
got it. So their motive is it almost personal? Like, look, I think something's going on. Let's find out, and let's put a program here. Or is it because Harry is in Nevada, right? And Area 51 is in Nevada. Now, the other fellow you're talking about is from Hawaii, right? And then Glenn. So it's not like everything is Nevada-based. Did any of his motives of wanting to do this because there was Area 51 in Nevada, or no?
Well, I think that the real impetus was the fact that he was aware there were U.S. military encounters going on with these UAP. There's a real national security issue here, right? You have these vehicles, let's call them vehicles, that have the ability to fly unimpeded, unchallenged into controlled U.S. airspace over sensitive military installations, and potentially even interfere with our nuclear equities, our nuclear capabilities. So there was a big concern on behalf of the government, both in the intelligence community and the Department of Defense. In some cases, we had almost near air collisions with these things. In fact, if you talk to some of the fighter pilots, they'll relay to you, they'll tell you where some of these vehicles have come so close to a combat formation that they've actually split the air formation right down the middle. So that's close, right? You're talking, what, 15 feet maybe? So there was a air safety issue as well, and it became almost like the worst kept secret in the Pentagon. It was happening so often, especially with a lot of our nuclear carrier strike groups, that people on the ship were literally using their phones to take pictures and videos of these things. So something had to be done, and I think from that perspective, I can't really talk much about the Skinwalker Ranch because my focus was more on the ATIP, the military aspect of this. But there was significant amount of data to suggest that, there's something there, because it's not just eyewitness testimony, right? It's not like grandma seeing some lights in the backyard. We're talking about trained observers that are trained to recognize a silhouette at 10 miles away and determine, is it an Su-22? Is it a MiG-25? Is it an F-16? And identify friend or foe. Do I kill it or do I save it, right? Within a second. This is how good these pilots are. And they're Top Gun trained. Like literally people watch the movie Top Gun. Well, these are the real Top Gun pilots. And not only are they seeing these craft that outperform anything that they have in their inventory, but it's also being further substantiated by gun camera footage and FLIR footage from a pod, forward-looking infrared footage. And, oh, by the way, it's also being corroborated by radar signature and radar returns from airborne radar, seaborne and ground-based radar systems. So you have this menagerie, if you will, or this collection of sensor capabilities, all reporting the same incident at the same time, at the same location, under the same circumstances, right? So now put that on the backdrop of where I come from, being a former special agent in counterintelligence. If I was providing this information to a jury, for example, we're well beyond reasonable doubt at this point. I mean, the jury would have to convict because the information is so compelling. I mean, these are the same collection sensor systems that we use to prosecute and win wars. And when you see these technologies that are coming into our controlled U.S. airspace, and there's really not a darn thing we can do about it, that's a problem. That's a real national security issue. Forget about tinfoil hats and Elvis on the mothership and all that other nonsense. We're talking a real national security. Imagine if one of these things had a Russian star on the tail or a North Korean tail number, right? It would be on the front page of every newspaper. But because these things didn't even have a tail, no rudder, no wings, no ailerons, no control surfaces, not even a cockpit, it was crickets. Nobody wanted to say anything. So you can think about this from a national security perspective, right? You go to an airport today or to a train station, you always hear over the announcements, if you see something suspicious, say something. And yet it was the exact opposite for our own men and women in uniform in the military when these things were coming up close and personal to their aircraft or over our facilities. Nobody wanted to say anything. It was crickets. And so I think there was a recognition by the senators at the time that something had to be done. And in fact, it's the same reason now, it's the same impetus why Congress now is involved in this topic, because they're concerned. They've heard from the whistleblowers. They've heard from the pilots. They have received some of the briefings. It's real. Whatever it is, it's real. That part of the conversation is already over.
So you get recruited to this Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, 07, 08. I think 07 is when it started. I think you get recruited in 08.
It was actually early part of 09.
Okay. So
I came to the Pentagon in 08, late 08, and it was really right after that on the tail end.
So you came to Pentagon and then they recruited you and assigned you to this. They give you this assignment after recruiting you from the Pentagon. That's kind of how they met you.
Yeah, there was a vetting process.
The nomination and the vetting process.
Yeah, so okay. I don't know what their selection criteria was. I've always thought it was because early on in my career, I did a lot of advanced aerospace protection, technology protection. I recently learned that was not the reason why. They just wanted a hardcore counterintelligence background and security background to make sure that
Makes sense.
The bad guys, the Russians.
Which strength do you want more, right? You need somebody that's going to be investigating, or instead of just a level of curiosity. But okay, let's stay on this. So now you're in there. Okay, you're in. You're going through it. At first, are you the guy that's always, I heard you say you're not a Star Wars guy, you're not a Star Trek guy, you weren't that guy, you weren't the guy that was a person that thought aliens and all these guys existed, but when you're going in, when was the first moment where you said, "Oh shit, things just got real"?
Yeah, so it was a conversation with the director of OSAP, Dr. James Lukatsky, this rocket scientist, and I remember at the end of the conversation we had, he still didn't tell me what the program was about, and he says, "So let me ask you something." Okay, he said, "What do you think about UFOs?" And I waited for a second. I thought, I said, "I don't." I answered him truthfully. I don't think about them. And he's like, "Well, what do you mean? You don't believe in them?" And I said, "Well, you didn't ask me that. You asked me, what do I think about them? And I don't think about them because I really don't have the luxury to think about them. I'm too busy doing, my daily job and paying the mortgage and whatnot." And he said, "Well, that's fair, but, let me give you a little piece of advice here. Don't let your analytic bias get the best of you, because what you're going to learn may challenge any preconceived notions or narratives that you have." And that was my first. At that moment, I wasn't sure if he was trying to maybe test me to see if I was maybe psychologically unstable. I didn't really respond to it, but that was probably my first real introduction that, hey, there's something going on here that they're taking very serious.
How much longer after you got hired did you have that conversation with the doc?
Well, they threw me into the deep end of the pool. So it was very quickly I realized that what he was saying was absolutely legit. Now, people have always asked me, just like you did, what was it like when you first realized what was actually going on? There's two ways I've noticed people absorbing this information, in my experience, just being part of the program. Some have this revelatory aha moment, this epiphany. Oh my gosh, you mean they're real? Where others, it's more of a slow and steady, gradual realization and acceptance. For me, I was probably the latter category. It got to the point where it was obvious this wasn't our technology, and we were pretty darn sure this wasn't adversarial technology. And at that point, you're forced to reconcile, any narrative you may have had before.